introduce our musicians. Already gathered over there, all tuned up. There's Jamie Russo on Reddick, Alicia Stevenson, Matt and Ashley Nocera, Miriam Shakely, and our special guest, Phil Collins Jr. Father Kevin Fazio.
Stop your crying, it'll be alright. Everyone's on this one.
Yeah, you can join us.
Jesus heal us.
Jesus heal. Oh, yeah. Listen to that.
Part of our Catholic Live program has been, and will continue to be, a witness speaker. And our witness speaker this evening comes from St. Paul Parish, David Ball. Standing for a minute there because I hadn't said hello, and I looked around and I didn't see you.
Thanks, Dave. Just thinking a few minutes ago how long I've known Dave, and I'll tell you in a little while where I first met him. But I always enjoy his sense of humor. Only Dave can talk to us about the fact that mother-in-law appears in the Bible. In fact, it's in this weekend's readings, which are all about suffering. Wonderful, Dave. I have to admit, when Father Kevin came to me a couple of weeks ago, caught me right after Mass, and says, "Dave, could you speak at the next presentation about your conversion experience?" For just a nanosecond, it caught me off guard because I thought, why is he asking me? I've always been Catholic. I didn't convert. But then in the next nanosecond, I realized, well, of course I did. But the reason in my mind I think that way is because from a very, very early point in my life, I knew where my heart was and I knew where my faith was. And I've been witnessed to my entire life so many different ways. And so I'm going to take just a few minutes this evening to tell you about some of those ways. I'm 64 years old, so I'm not going to tell you about all of them, but I will tell you about a few of them. And they surely go back to my very beginning. I was born in St. Elizabeth Catholic Hospital in December 1950 in Lafayette, Indiana. And quite truly, the very first faces I saw as I came into this world were the nuns that were assisting our family doctor as I was being delivered. Now, I realize that sounds a little strange these days, but remember back in the 50s, we actually had enough nuns that Catholic schools and Catholic hospitals were staffed by the sisters. And although I don't remember that day, my birth certificate at home has 3 signatures on it. It has the signature of our family doctor, Charles Crampton, and then 2 signatures from sisters at the hospital who were in supervisory capacities. So, although I received infant baptism in the Presbyterian Church, I can truly say that I was drug kicking and screaming into this world by the Catholic Church. So, I don't remember that But like most of you, I have a very early first memory. And my very first memory in life is a little less than 2 years later. So I'm not quite 2 years old, and I'm back in St. Elizabeth Hospital. And in my memory, I'm sitting in it seems to me in my memory like it's a stainless steel tub. It's some kind of a vessel that has hot water in it, very hot water. And the nuns are putting hot packs on my legs. And the reason they're doing that, the reason I was back in the hospital was in 1952, I, like tens of thousands of other people in this country, had contracted polio. And my legs weren't working anymore. I couldn't walk. And the nuns were there to work with the doctors to help heal me, to help comfort me, and to care for me around the clock, because many of you are old enough to remember that back in the 50s, the protocol in hospitals was, even when you admitted a child, unlike today, the parents didn't stay there with the child. The child was left in the hospital and was cared by the people at the hospital, and in my case, by the sisters at St. Elizabeth. They didn't know that they were witnessing to me, and yet here I am, 60-some years later, and that's still my earliest memory in life. And it's not a memory of being scared or feeling abandoned. It's a memory of being cared for and being loved. A few years later, I had regained my ability to walk. I don't wear braces. I do all of the things that anybody else does these days and have most of my life. My family later moved to Tucson, Arizona, and I started school. And we'll fast forward a few years to when I'm in the 4th grade. And there was a classmate of mine, a wonderful young girl. Her name was Candy Lowy. And we were both learning to play instruments so that we could be in the school band. Candy rode the school bus with me. And she was going through a process in her parish called catechism classes. And I was very curious about it. And so Candy would tell me as we rode the bus what she was learning and what she was doing in the catechism classes. And that went on for a couple of years, through 6th grade. And I learned a lot about my Catholic faith, clear back then, from Candy's witness to me about what she was learning in her catechism classes. And then my folks built a new home in another part of Tucson, and I moved to a different school district, and didn't see Candy after that. But I still remember those lessons that I learned from her. Life went on. I went on through school and through university and began a very long 37-plus year career with Pennzoil. And of course, as they tell us, we're a pilgrim people, and I certainly was a pilgrim people in both the physical sense as well as the spiritual sense. I was moved all over the country during my career. And at one point, I was transferred to Shreveport, Louisiana. And there was a young engineer that worked for me in the office there named Bobby Knight, no relation to the other notorious basketball coach by the name of Bobby Knight, although Bobby liked basketball. And Bobby was from a very devout Catholic family in South Louisiana, and I got to know him very well. We became great friends. We played racquetball together and went to concerts together, and I got to know his family down in South Louisiana, his brothers and sisters. And the thing that I was always so impressed about with that family was how seamlessly they melded their faith and the way they lived their life. Their Catholic faith was their life. It was just how they did things. Every one of them. And he had a large family. He had 8 brothers and sisters. And then shortly after I got to know his family down there, both Bobby and I were transferred out to Utah. And so we were together out there for about 4.5 years. And did a lot of traveling together, seeing the beautiful West, learned to ski. But we spent a lot of time whenever we were traveling, and even when we were at home in Vernal, at Mass. And I went to Mass every weekend and learned even more about my Catholic faith. And ultimately I was transferred again, this time to a little town in Pennsylvania, Butler, Pennsylvania. And Bobby went on down to Houston. And I was here one weekend on what's called a house hunting trip, where the realtor takes you around and you look for a new home to buy. And we had finished, and it was a Saturday afternoon. And I was driving around Butler, and I drove up McCain Street and drove past St. Paul Church. And there was a wedding party out there on those steps. And it just touched me. I looked at it, and it was so beautiful. And I said, I want to have that in my life. And I went to Mass at St. Paul the next day, and then in the afternoon went back out to the airport and flew back out to Salt Lake to meet the movers who were coming to pack my house. But I said to myself, when I get back to Butler, I'm going to do what I need to do to be a part of that life. And when I came back, I made the phone call to the rectory. And this wonderful young lady answered the phone. She was so welcoming, so full of enthusiasm, so kind and gracious. Her name is Debbie Martin. And she told me what I needed to do to be a part of the parish. And just her enthusiasm, her energy, the whole approach made me feel so wanted and so welcome. And I did sign up. I participated in RCIA that coming fall, which is where I first encountered my good friend Dave Malarkey, and I hate to even say how many years ago that was. I see you're dyeing your hair now, Dave. But I attended RCIA, and like I hope some of you here, I became confirmed at the Easter Vigil. And I was so impressed with what I learned in the RCIA and how it was conducted, and folks like Dave, and as it turns out, my future mother-in-law and others that were there, that I stayed on the court team for a decade afterwards because I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I learned every year, and it was a chance to witness. And life has gone on since then. I've gotten married. I have children. Our oldest son is married and is soon going to have a child of his own, and our other two are in high school. But I continue to be witnessed to today by my wife, by my family, by Father Kevin, and by so many of you. And I'm always reminded of something that Father Gloniger used to tell the classes every year. He'd say, you never know when you may be the only face of Jesus that somebody sees in their day. And that was his way of saying that we all need to be prepared to and conduct ourselves so that we are witnessing for Christ, whatever we're doing all day long. Now, you may not even know that you're witnessing to somebody. Certainly that bridal party on the steps of St. Paul that Saturday afternoon in 1991 had no idea that they were providing witness to somebody driving up McCain Street. Candy may have known that she was witnessing to me when she was telling me about her catechism classes. Bobby's family probably didn't know how much they were witnessing to me by the way they lived their lives. But just over and over and over throughout my life, I've been blessed by witness. And I just leave you with Father Gloniger's message here this evening, that you never know when you may be that person that somebody else needs to have witness to them in their life. So be open to it, be prepared for it. Thank you, and God bless you.
Gosh, Dave, it's wonderful thoughts. Thanks for sharing very much. Dr. Michael Therrien is the Secretary of Evangelization and Catholic Education for the Diocese of Pittsburgh. He also serves as a professor of fundamental moral theology of the Augustine Institute. He taught at St. Vincent's Seminary in Lake Trot. For 7 years, he was academic dean there. His prior work experience includes 2 years with the Action Institute in Grand Rapids, Michigan, teaching high school religion, serving as a director of religious education, a youth minister, and an RCIA leader for various parishes, RCIA. He has also led adult faith formation in various parishes for the past 10 years. He holds a BA in theology from Gonzaga University, an MA in theology and Christian ministry from Franciscan University, a licentiate in sacred theology from the International Theological Institute in Austria, and a doctorate in fundamental moral theology from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland. He will speak to us tonight on the gospel and medical practice. Is there a Catholic approach to medicine? Dr. Michael Therrien.
Well, it's great to be here. It really is great to be here, and it's especially special for me because of my relationship with Father Fazio, who I taught at St. Vincent, and was an integral part of his formation for, was it the whole 4 years? Yeah. And so it's just it's an honor. It's my first student in the diocese here who's invited me to come and speak, and it's a great honor. I want to just share with all of you, just as a former professor of his, that he was a very motivated student, and tonight's event is evidence of how that has continued. And as a professor, you're always emboldened and encouraged by students that really dig in and take an interest in the subject and really, bask in it. And Father Kevin was one of those students, and we know that tonight because to have me come back and speak about biomedical ethics to a parish means that he must like something about that course. So, at any rate, it is really great to be here, and I just have to say that I've been to many parishes around the country, and this is a great turnout. This is a great turnout, so you get an A. Very well done. And I've heard wonderful things about what you've accomplished up here, and I've just heard this evening that you've been reassigned. So, and you're going to be a pastor down my way. So, exciting. Congratulations. And I know that you will do a wonderful job in that capacity. I just have to get a couple of things off my mind. As I was listening to these introductions, just things popped in my head. So little kids' comments. My son, when he was 2 once, at the dinner table, we were having lasagna and peas. And just out of nowhere, he just said, lasagna in the highest and peas to God's people on earth. He was 2. And I don't know where, he just sort of put those two things together in his head. I thought it was quite ingenious. I had to share that. Okay, so our topic for this evening, the gospel in medical practice. Is there a Catholic approach to medicine? It's kind of a forced question because it's pretty obvious what the answer is, right? So, yes, of course there's a distinctively Catholic or Christian approach to medicine. So maybe we should just all go home. I've answered the question. What I'd like to do this evening, I want to touch on 4 different things. And you have to appreciate the fact that this is a vast topic. And I can barely scrape the surface in the time that I have this evening. In fact, I'm going to take my watch out so that I can keep my eye on the time and try to hit all the points that I'd like to in the time that I have. See how I'm going to do this so it'll stay. But basically, I want to touch on 4 things. First of all, I just want to talk about certain elements of the gospel of life. Okay, the gospel of life. This has been articulated by John Paul II. And there are just some things I want to pull out of that encyclical, the gospel of life, just as sort of framing the question of biomedical ethics for us. Secondly, I want to talk about some of the principles of medical ethics that practitioners of medicine would bring to their profession from a Christian perspective. Third, I'd like to sketch very briefly some of the challenges that we face from the culture. One of the things that we're faced with today is that the Christian worldview is in pretty serious conflict with the secular worldview. And unfortunately, what happens is that we want to dive into arguments over issues and don't really realize that we're talking at cross purposes with each other. And that devolves very quickly into finger pointing and name calling and ill will and all sorts of things. It's us versus them. We can descend into a sectarian, kind of mentality very quickly. when what we really need to be doing is we really need to, first of all, understand the context of our own belief so that we really understand why we believe what we believe. And that's where I'm going to spend most of the time tonight. But we also have to understand the context of where secular people, minded people are coming from. Because they're not just a bunch of bad people that are trying to do bad things. Okay? There are people that have been formed to think a certain way, and there's a certain logic to the way they think. We just happen to disagree profoundly with the principles that inform their perspective. And if we really want to get anywhere, we have to understand those two things well, and we have to witness to our perspective. Not necessarily wave a finger and accuse, but we have to open up dialogue and ask critical, deep, penetrating questions and try to come together around the truth. Because these are not self-evident, obvious kinds of answers to these big questions. You know, as Catholics, we enjoy the beauty of faith, meaning we trust what the church teaches, most of us. So when the church says that, contraception is wrong, or embryonic stem cell is wrong, or cloning, or in vitro fertilization, well-meaning, practicing Catholics just say, yes, the church says it, I believe it. But we don't appreciate that if you're trying to understand why the church believes that, it's actually quite difficult. There's a lot to these issues. And so, in terms of our own faith, we're called just to embrace the beauty of the church's teaching and the truth of that teaching and to live it to the best of our ability. But if we want to affect transformation out in the culture, we have to become conversant in our worldview as Christian people and in the worldview that those that we disagree with have, so that we can come to a meeting of the minds and a meeting of hearts. That's the challenge before us, and I can promise you that that's way harder work. It's easy to say, you're wrong, the church says, and be done with it. But as we know from experience, we don't get very far doing that. So that's what I want to try to unpack as much as I can. At the end, we'll hit on a few issues, and the issues will come up by way of illustration as I talk about these different principles and different concepts that we have to try to get a better understanding of. Okay, so let's plunge. Okay, part one, the gospel of life. Probably the most important thing that encyclical teaches us is that life itself, the word life, has a very rich and textured meaning for us as Christian people. A biologist, when they think of life, they think of a living organism. They think of biology, maybe some chemistry. But as Christian people, our primary point of reference for this word life is the life that was revealed to us in Jesus Christ. And that life is not simply natural life. That life is supernatural. It's called into supernatural life in communion. The life that God has given us is not simply natural existence, but He's called us into communion with His own divine life. That's the Christian gospel. And so the meaning of the term life is very, very rich. It's very deep. And life involves everything from how we live, to community, to the interior landscape of our souls, to our psychology, to our spirituality. This is what life means for us. And we probably don't think about it a whole lot, but this is all, we just take this for granted. We understand this. We know this. So this is the first person. So we say we're pro-life. We have to be very careful that we understand what we mean by that. I oftentimes very intentionally convict people, Catholics, on the issue of contraception that to be pro-life does not simply mean conceiving children. We have to also raise those children. We have to care for those lives that we bring into the world. And then we have to help those lives pass over into eternity. That's what it means to be pro-life in its completeness, in its totality. So that's the first thing that we have to bear in mind. Secondly, we talk about the dignity of the human person. But what do we mean? Well, we know that human beings have value. They have value, but why do they have value? That's the question. Nobody out there in the secular world is going to disagree that human beings have value. I mean, most of the people that we're talking to, they might talk out of both sides of their mouth, but what they usually do is they explain away the humanity. Right? So in the case of abortion, for example, they don't acknowledge that you have a human being present. That's how they can justify it. Okay? So, but where does this dignity originate? Well, it originates in God. Because we recognize that human existence, human beingness, is a gift. It's a gift. That's the fundamental stance that we have towards life. Life is a gift. It's given. It's not something that we are entitled to. Who would be entitled to my life prior to my existence? Right? I wasn't there to make a claim on anybody. God, you have to give me existence. It's not possible. I'm given my life as a gift. And of course, my parents were integral in that giving process. So, the dignity of the human person begins with the fact that we originate in God as a gift, given to ourselves and given to others. And then we are called to a life of love and communion. And that life and that communion is primarily with God. First and foremost, it's with God. So we are created by God, and we're created for God. So who do we belong to? God. Right? We belong to God. And that means that when I interact with every person that I meet, what's my obligation? My obligation is to treat the other person as a good in themselves, to love them for their own sake, to just simply affirm their existence because God has given them to me and to everyone around them as a gift. And therefore, I'm never permitted on the basis of that fact to ever in any way use another person. I can never instrumentalize another person. It's just simply off limits because they don't belong to me in that way. Now, we can talk about belonging to each other in the context of love, like a spousal relationship. I belong to my wife and my wife belongs to me. But I'm not her property. Okay? I'm her companion. Okay? There's a difference. So, the dignity of the human person is rooted in the fact that we come from God, we're created for God, okay? And then finally, we're redeemed. We are redeemed by Christ. We are all, and each and every one, Christ died for every single soul that has ever been conceived. So, those are the three reasons that we uphold the dignity of the human person. Okay? That's a huge difference from the way the world out there sees it. Third, because we believe in everlasting life and eternal life, we also believe that this life, okay, our earthly life, has a kind of relative value. It's not an absolute good. Now, people might say, whoa, wait a second. What do you mean? What do I mean? Well, let me put it this way. Many of the things that the church says are sinful and wrong in the realm of medicine and biomedical ethics acquired their moral value precisely because people have absolutized the value of this life, at least their own. Okay? And as a consequence of that, they're not willing to suffer or undergo any suffering as a consequence of it. Okay? And there's different ways in which this can manifest itself. Okay? Oftentimes, a very practical way of seeing this is that so often the decisions that are made around the practice of medicine are driven by fear, not by confidence in the gift that life is, and that this life is not all there is. This life is not the end, it's the beginning. Okay, another concept that we have to deal with is this notion of dominion. Okay, in the Bible, in Genesis, we're told that we are to have dominion. But what does that mean? There's a lot of researchers out there in laboratories who are exercising what they believe to be a legitimate dominion over creation. They're cloning. Why should we not do this? I just learned yesterday that the Parliament in Great Britain has just passed a law that is now going to allow, through the process of in vitro fertilization, the conception of a child with 3 parents. Okay? So the mother, the father, that is the 2 that want the child, and then a third DNA material from another woman in order to prevent the passing on of a defective gene. Okay? It's very interesting. Is that a rightful exercise of dominion? That's the question. The church would say no. So what does dominion mean for us? It means stewardship. That's what it means. It means care. We are called to help realize the potential that God has put into creation, but we have to do it according to the principles and the rules that God has put in place for doing so. And that means that we have to respect the boundaries that God has established. Because when we transgress those boundaries, we put ourselves into the place of God. And you know, it's interesting, one of the legislators prefaced her remark in the interview by saying, "We are not playing God. We are just trying to help people." Which raises a very interesting question because so much of these issues revolve around one fundamental problem, and that is that the intentions are usually really good. They have good ends in mind. The question is are the means morally acceptable? Are they morally legitimate? Is this a good way to achieve a good end? And one of the principles of our faith is that you can never do evil to achieve a good end. And we have to uphold that principle. Because if we ever make an exception to that principle, where will it end? We can always find an exception for the sake of a good intention. That's really the definition of just about every sin. Does this make sense? Are you following me? Okay. Okay, when we talk about the right to life, the church believes that that right is grounded in a responsibility. And that's important. A right isn't some just simple entitlement or claim that we have. A right is rooted in a responsibility. The reason why I have the right to life, the right to my life, is because I first and foremost am entrusted with a responsibility from God to be a steward of that life. And therefore you are never permitted to unjustly interfere with that responsibility that I have. But what we do typically is we lead in our culture with a claim to an entitlement without any sense of responsibility. And so what happens to rights talk in our culture is that it gets immediately reduced to, I have a right to whatever I want, as long as I don't, quote unquote, hurt anybody. And of course the definition of what it means to hurt someone just gets narrower and narrower and narrower. So you'll hear this all the time. And it's rooted in this, I have this right to choose this. Why? Because I want it. That's why. People feel they have a right to something because they just want something. People often don't make that extra step in actually admitting that. But we see this, for example, with the gay marriage movement. Why do you believe that you have a right to be married? Because we want to be married. At the end of the day, and we're not hurting anyone. See? And the church would say, well, what is the responsibility that God has given you for the sake of which you have a right to marriage? As Christian people, we would say that responsibility is to come together to create a family and to procreate and to create the unity of love within which that procreation should occur. Because we all know that the best way to bring a child into the world is through love, and the best way to develop and grow a child is through love. And we know what happens to children when that love breaks down in the family. That's the responsibility that we have. That's inscribed into our sexuality. Our sexuality is encoded with a responsibility. That responsibility is L-I-F-E. Life. And so our right to marry is because the love that we have for another person moves us towards fruitfulness. Okay? And while we can understand why people of same-sex attraction feel drawn into that kind of union, they aren't, by virtue of that inclination or that orientation, entrusted with the responsibility for life. Okay? And that's hard. That's difficult in our culture. So rights have to be understood in relationship to responsibilities. Okay? And by the way, let me just say, that doesn't mean that we don't like people with same-sex attraction. That doesn't mean that we marginalize people with same-sex attraction. It means that we simply acknowledge the reality of the situation as God has established it. Okay? It's not a judgment. Another point, redemptive suffering. We have a very different view of suffering. This is something that weighs very, very heavily on me. In fact, I have an article coming out in Pittsburgh Catholic on euthanasia. I think it's this week. And I talk a lot about how our culture really does not know how to deal with suffering anymore. So, if you're standing in the perspective of a person out there in the secular world, and you ask yourself, what's the point of suffering? If you don't have faith, and you don't have clarity around what comes next after we die, what do you think you're going to do with the problem of suffering? You're going to try to eliminate it as much as you can and at all costs. Why would you not? I mean, honestly, the humane thing to do is to put us out of our misery. That's what we do with dogs. And horses and pets. Why do we do that? We do that because when an animal like that suffers, it has no meaning for them. Okay? But that's not what we believe as Christian people. Now, prior to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, I'm not sure humanity perceived any meaning in suffering. And as a result of that, suicide, in many cases, was considered honorable. If you go back into the ancient world, if you dishonored your family, if you dishonored your country, and didn't die for them, it was expected that you would kill yourself as an honorable act showing your loyalty. Okay? We're moving quickly in that direction. I guarantee you that the next step after legalizing euthanasia is going to be that there will be a societal expectation that it is wrong for you to burden society with your suffering, and therefore it's your obligation to put yourself down. It'll be right around the corner. Okay? But we look upon the cross of Jesus Christ, and we know that suffering has meaning. Okay? When we enter into Scripture, here's what we learn. We know that suffering came into the world because of sin. We know that. So there's a relationship between sin and suffering. We know that when Jesus healed people of their afflictions, what did he say to them? Your sins are forgiven. Have you ever thought how weird that is? Not like, hey, go and enjoy your life, You can take up running again. You can start reading. He says, your sins are forgiven you, or go and sin no more, or your faith has saved you. So clearly Christ links affliction with sin. And finally, he dies. How does he affect our redemption? By suffering. So, in the least, we can step back and say, okay, we know that suffering somehow fits into God's plan. It's part of the drama of sin. It's part of the drama of redemption. So it has to have significance. And in fact, we know that it does. Because, and Catholics, especially older Catholics, you'll know this. What's the old saying? Offer it up, right? You heard that? Okay. Suffering, when united to Jesus' suffering because you love him and you want to be near to him, especially at his loneliest and darkest moment. When you want to draw near to Christ through your suffering, by joining your suffering to his, guess what's happening? Redemption is happening. You are being transformed into Christ. And Christ is transforming the world through you. That's what's happening. So as a Christian person, we can't accept that suffering is meaningless and pointless. In fact, we have to be witnesses to the redemptive power of suffering, which means that we have to learn how to suffer well. And we're not good at it. We complain. It's like the Israelites. We have to learn how to suffer well, graciously, patiently. We have to learn how to be present to people when they suffer. How to enter into the experience of other people's suffering and be with them there. That's a great testimony of hope. Because we can help bear people through that experience, just as the Marys and John did at the foot of the cross. We can help bear people through that experience into eternal glory. What a beautiful privilege that is. And then the last point is just a very general one, and that is charity in all things. Charity in all things. when we proceed to look at the practice of medicine and we look at what we're called to do, it's love of God and love of neighbor which must be the ordering principle of everything we do. How would Christ be functioning right now in this role, in this situation? That's a great question to ask. All right. So that was part one. Part two will go a little faster. So principles of medical practice. So what we've just discussed about the gospel life, this is how the church frames the question in terms of, if you want to look at the issues, you got to keep all these things in mind that we've just discussed. Now, these comments are directed specifically to people that are in medical practice. And so I'll keep these remarks relatively brief. I'm guessing, how many, raise your hand if you're a practitioner, nurse? Okay, so maybe 10 of you, okay. Okay, first of all, I want to point this out. This isn't so much a matter of revelation, but just of common sense. Medicine is an art. It's not first and foremost a science. It's an art. And any art builds on the principles of nature. And this is difficult for us because oftentimes what we want to do is we want to usurp the principles of nature in order to achieve an outcome. Because we can. Okay? Because we can. But we have to remember that medicine is an art. Okay? It's an art. We're trying to bring about an outcome, and that outcome is health. It's healing. It's homeostasis. It's the proper integration of all the functionings of all the systems within the body. And there's different philosophies about what disease is, etc. But I'm going to make a challenging comment here. I question how much medicine is in the business of healing at times. Are we rather creating dependency on lucrative products that keep industry and corporations that produce these things going? We have allowed a certain market logic to creep into the practice of medicine, where price, where kickbacks, commissions, and things like this become motivating incentives for how we make decisions, for how we allocate resources, etc. Now, I'm not saying that, every person that practices medicine, is guilty as charged. That's not what I'm saying. Most people that are practitioners are out there trying to help, trying to serve, trying to care for people. But we get caught up in a system, and we go along with that system. And here's my challenge. Can we step back, and can we look into what we're doing and ask ourselves, are we really in the business of healing? Are we doing everything we can to restore people to health? Let me give you one little teeny tiny microscopic example. When my parents were in the hospital when they were younger, they gave patients bone broth. Brothy soups that were homemade. I guarantee the sisters did this. Do you know what you get now? Jell-O. Honestly, you look at the plate of food and you ask yourself, why am I eating this? Now, I know probably nobody ever thinks about it, but something as simple as that. Are we actually feeding patients food that is nutrient dense, regenerative to the body? Or are we simply giving carb loads and calories? It's just a question. But that's the kind of thing that when you talk about the cost of healthcare, why do certain things cost so much money? Do you know why? Because death is on the line. People are afraid when they're facing their mortality. We have insurance companies that, quote unquote, cover the costs of these things. Well, any economist will know that that just drives the price right through the ceiling. But does anybody step back and say, are we really aligning ourselves against the mission of healing people? So that's the question. It's an art. It's an art, the art of healing. That's what medicine really is. Okay, secondly, we have to realize that the practice of medicine can be cultivated not only by what we learn from the sciences, but also what we can learn from theology. Faith. Jesus we call the divine healer. How did he heal? Now, we're not talking miracles. We're not going to be performing miracles in hospitals. But there's a way in which he brought a personal presence to his healing ministry that just didn't heal the body, but healed the whole person. Okay? So are we as Christian people really looking to our faith as sources for how we practice? Or are we just following the American Medical Association and the protocols that the scientists out there give us? I'm not saying that those are bad, but I'm suggesting that they're not complete. As people of faith, we have this beautiful and rich tradition of medicine. In fact, we invented the hospital. We need to mine that tradition and bring forth and bring out those things that are part of that heritage, part of our tradition, and build a culture of healing within our hospitals and medical centers. We also, finally, I just want to say, along these same lines, we also have to incorporate the work of grace in our healing ministry. This is one thing that we can bring as Christian people. Are we opening ourselves up to praying with our patients? Do we pray for them? Do we enter into a ministry of presence and listen to them and let them unpack their anxieties and their worries and their fears and their cares? Are we helping to facilitate unity in the family at moments of crisis and distress? Are we really ministering to the whole person? These are great questions for us to ask. Okay? Grace is healing. So if all we're doing is operating on the side of nature, what medication do I prescribe? What's the proper protocol for diagnosis here? What are the proper protocols for hygiene, etc.? Those are all good things. But we have to bring grace to bear into this experience for people. This is, again, the primacy of charity, but God is at work. He wants to be present in all of this. And these are amazing moments to minister to a human soul. Think of the little child who's going in for the first prick of their finger. Think about what it's like to be able to enter into that space of that little person and to bring the love and the consolation of Jesus Christ to them in that moment. Maybe you can't do it explicitly because they're not a believer, but maybe they are. Okay? Do we bless each other? There are so many little ways that as Christian people we can be a witness and an instrument and a channel of God's grace in people's lives. So, principles of medical practice. It's an art that is ordered towards healing after the model of the divine physician. We have to draw upon all of the sources God gives us, both from our faith and also from the sciences. And we really have to bring grace to bear on how we practice medicine. That's what makes us distinctively Christian. All right. 3. What we're contending against is a culture that understands very little of anything I've just said. It's just Greek. Okay? And very quickly, here's why. Okay? First and foremost, I think we're dealing with a culture that's been shaped by what I would call the idolatry of the sciences. A mechanistic view of things. Who are the new high priests of our society? It's scientists. They're the ones wearing the white robes. And whatever they say is true. Nobody ever really questions them. And nobody really challenges whether their view of things is complete or not. Okay? There's this tendency in our culture today to say that if you can't measure it, it's not true. It's just subjective. And so when we come up against some of these biomedical issues, they're saying, look, we have the ability. We can do this, so we should. And we want to say, but why? And, not only why should we do this, but should we do this? And they want to say, well, that's just that they just want to stuff our religion back at us and say that's just your opinion, that's just your personal perspective. Don't challenge us. Okay? Don't question, because we know and you don't. We're the experts, you're not. But here's what's happening out there. And I guarantee you, most people in this room can attest to what I'm about to say right now. You go in and you have a medical experience, and you follow the protocol because this is what the experts are telling you, and what's your experience? This isn't working. I take this drug and I've got 5 more problems to deal with now. I tried this and it's not working. There's something missing. Okay? So we live in a challenging time that we want to say, no, wait, time out. We have problems, we have concerns, we have reservations about this. And the church has beautiful wisdom on this. But because it doesn't fit into this very narrow view of reality, it's rejected. Because it's not mathematical and it's not measurable. Experience doesn't count for much anymore. So this is one big problem. IVF, everyone says, we got to do in vitro fertilization. Well, we are now we're engaging the first generation of IVF kids that are coming up and, getting into adulthood. And what are they finding in their research? They're finding that these people have deep psychological problems. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them. They're struggling. And we're just beginning to ask, well, why? Why? There might be something that's just not right in this equation. But because we can do it, we should. Right? That's the mentality. The idea of progress. It's just, we got to go. We got to progress. We got to keep progressing. But where are we going? How much have we really improved the quality of life? We have in certain ways, physically, some of our bodily ailments, like I'm thankful that when I break a bone, I can go in and get a cast. I'm thankful for so many things like that. But there's this kind of rabid pursuit of progress for progress' sake. And we never step back and ask ourselves, where are we going with all of this? Do we really want to clone? Are we going to wake up one day and realize that we've created an entire population of people that were manufactured in a lab for people's personal fancies? Are we going to wake up to that world someday? Are we going to wake up to a world where most children come into the world through a Petri dish because their parents can assemble the genetic combination and have the perfect designer baby that they want? And alongside that child is the oops, accidental, natural child. Who's going to say, well, do I count because I wasn't designed for a purpose? I don't have the genetic enhancements that my siblings or my peers have? Do you see the possibilities there? Are we going to wake up one day in this world, George Orwell?
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to wake up one day to this? Because we never stopped and asked ourselves, where are we going with all of this? What's the point? Genetically modified organisms. Are we going to wake up one day because we've unleashed on the world an apocalyptic disaster because we've crossed a species boundary that nature itself has never crossed? We don't know. We don't know. But that's the problem. We don't know. Another issue that we deal with is individualism and autonomy. So many of these issues that we face don't think about the relationships and the community of the human family. It's all just my individual rights. Okay? I can remember talking to somebody who was a big Hollywood lawyer. He's now a monk at St. Vincent Arch Abbey. He attended the physician-assisted suicide, the euthanizing of some celebrity some years back. And there was this big party. And I remember him telling me, it was really, really strange. Everybody was trying to act really happy, but nobody knew exactly how to behave in this context. It was really awkward. Because there was nothing really to celebrate. We're just going to watch this person kill themselves. It's just bizarre. So this individualism can often lead us to isolation, this kind of notion of freedom as autonomy. We should be able to do whatever we want. We also are dealing with a culture that's steeped in relativism. Right? It's all, I should be able to just do whatever I want. I always say, there are certain laws that govern human nature. You can't really violate those laws, you can only demonstrate them. Okay, gravity, for example, you can't break the law of gravity, you just demonstrate it. So this is what happens with relativism. People try to live by a relativistic point of view, perspective, but reality hits them really hard. Because reality doesn't bend to their self-justification. And that's the problem. So when people act out of a relativistic worldview, they end up doing harm to themselves and to others. And finally, we deal with a culture that has a tendency, especially in America, to commodify everything. We're commodifying reproduction. We're commodifying body parts. And what are we doing here? You think about it. What's going to happen when we put a price tag? Let's just paint this scenario and then I'll end. So there you are. You're right at the final moments of your life, right? And you're an organ donor. Okay? And there's a market for your liver or your heart or whatever. Do you think they're going to wait till you die and risk the possibility of a delay that's just a little too long and they can't harvest you? No. They're not going to wait. They're just going to euthanize you so that they can pull it out and use it somewhere else. What are people willing to do if there's enough money involved in it? My son got in the car the other day and said to me, "Dad, did you know that a woman can sell her eggs for $40,000 a piece if you have the right, if you're a Harvard grad and you're really intelligent or really beautiful?" Just think about that for a second. Think about how that distorts human relationships. We can do it, but the question is, should we? All right. So, you can see how I can barely scratch the surface, okay, of how big and vast this is. But what I hope I've been able to do this evening in the time that we had was just to frame the question for you, to bring some of the principles that we operate with to bear, to offer a couple of challenges, and also to give you a little bit of a picture of what we're up against, the mentality, the thinking, and the work that lies ahead of us, to be witnesses of the culture of life to the world around us, so that we can bring others into the tremendous truth that we profess about the gift of human life and what it is. The gift of human life and what it is. So why don't we end with a prayer, and then we can open it up for a few questions. Does that sound good? Okay. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for this day. And we thank you for the opportunity and the privilege it is to gather together and to spend time with each other in fellowship, opening our hearts up to whatever it is that you want to say to us. I just ask you to bless this parish and bless these people here who have taken time out of their lives to be here. Help them to be courageous witnesses to the gospel of life. And I also ask a special blessing on Father Fazio, that you will bless his priestly ministry and his new assignment, and give him peace and courage as he goes forth. And we ask these things as we ask all things through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Are there questions? Yeah.
I would preface my question with a possible answer. You might say it's my question that I should read your article in the Pittsburgh Catholic this coming week.
Okay.
The question is, at this time of year, in fact, 2 weeks ago with the pro-life march, we hear the cliche about respect for life from moment of conception till natural death. But we don't often hear the natural death defined, expanded on. So can you comment on natural death in contrast to unnatural death?
Right. Yeah. Okay, so it answers a very simple question. What is it ultimately that ends your life? Okay. What is it that ends your life? If it's a condition, that's a natural death. If it's the act of a person, it's euthanasia or it's murder. Okay? Does that make sense? In the case of medicine, if you just like Terry Schiavo, they terminated her life by withdrawing food from her when she was not dying. She died of starvation because of what people did. So that's how you answer the question, is this a natural death? Well, what is it that kills you in the end? Is it a condition, a disease that takes your life eventually? Or is it the act of another person or yourself? And that's the difference. Now, the question that always comes up, and this is where it gets complicated, because modern technology has given us ways of prolonging life through technical intervention. And the question is are we, first of all, are we obligated to prolong our life by the use of extraordinary means? Okay, and ordinary means would be food, water, even oxygen, I think today is ordinary. Okay, but not necessarily. No one's obligated to have a breathing apparatus. No one's obligated even to have a feeding tube. But a person has to have access to food and water so that they can ingest it naturally. But no one is obligated to prolong their life through extraordinary means. One is permitted to do so if one can, garner the resources or whatever. But no one's obligated to do that. So when a person has employed extraordinary means, are we permitted to cease the use of those means and allow a person to die? And the church says yes. So we're allowed, quote unquote, to unplug the machine. Because the cause of death there, it is the condition that takes the person's life. And the extraordinary means, the church would say, is not really giving life, it's just prolonging the dying process. So that's how the church resolves that issue. And of course, that moment of decision requires, in my opinion, prayer and discernment and consultation and consent. When do you make that decision? When do you just let it go? You know, my mom died about 2 years ago of cancer, and we had to make some decisions about what kind of care we were going to continue to give her. And at one point in time, we said, no more treatment. She said no more. I don't. It's not really. I'm not getting better. I'm just putting off the day. When I go home, and so it's time to just let me go. And that's perfectly okay. That's a real act of resignation to divine providence and a profound act of faith. So, other questions?
I'm a home health nurse, and I struggle a lot with the art of medicine versus the profit of medicine and the business of medicine. The productivity is required to reach a profit versus the time and the care to fulfill my role as an art. I wonder if you have any comment on that struggle.
Yeah, I'll say this very sincerely. I'll pray for you. Because it's not easy. You're in a structured environment that's very decisive for you. So it's hard to make your own choices in that. But that doesn't mean you can't. And I think that where you can, you have to take great liberty to be the presence of Christ for people. And just do it boldly. If it means taking a little more time than the schedule says, do it. Because the person is worth it. If it means your instincts, your gut says, I don't think this is a good thing to give this person, and they don't want it, follow those instincts. Because I think the thing is we've become so submissive to certain protocols that we've dehumanized the process. And we forget, what are we in the business of? We're in the business of caring for people. And wherever and however you can meet their whole and entire need as a person. Maybe it's listening to them. Maybe it's letting them talk about their feelings and their anxieties. Maybe it's just readjusting them for the 100th time to help them be comfortable. Whatever it is, do it. You can be a profound witness in the face of all of this, and God will be so pleased with that. The fact that you just care is already half the battle. That you're aware that there's a tension here. So that's what I would say briefly. There's a great movie. I'm trying to remember. Emma Thompson is in it. Wit. Everybody should see that movie. You might only be able to ever watch it once because it is so powerful. It's called Wit. It's a true story of a woman, a very accomplished professor in an Ivy League school who documents her death process as a cancer patient, doing some experimental treatments. And she comments. It's like a monologue as she goes through and comments on her experience. It's very, very powerful. But there's a great relationship between the nurse, she and the nurse, that I think really speaks right to your question. Very dramatic, profound scene at the end. It's just incredible. Yeah. One last? Yeah.
I just wanted to share something with Gavin. I have a power of attorney for my mom who was 91, and I've had a lot of concerns about that. And I called and spoke to a father of 20 years. He spoke to Eli Christie, and truth. Consider all the facts, get clear answers from the doctors. The treatment should be proportionate to the outcome. And I just found this very helpful.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Every single one of those points. Did he print that up like on a card or anything?
No.
You should ask him to do that. That would be a great thing to hand out to people in the pews, you know. That's excellent. That's a great summation of just here are principles to act on when I'm in the moment that are very simple and accessible. Excellent. Should we? One more?
How much are we supposed to be able to allow them freedom? How much suffering are we allowed freedom or when they were dying?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Let me say two things. One, just on a very practical note, you want to make them as comfortable as possible without giving them a lethal dose. Okay? And they know where that is, that line is. But secondly, it's important to help a person retain their faculties of reason for as long as possible. Now, when they go unconscious, like my mom kind of went to a point where she became unconscious, and so her levels of morphine were pretty much kept her asleep, but it was amazing. She had a couple of moments of pure alertness right before she died. It's a great grace. But it's hard because you don't want them to suffer, but you also want them to be able to exercise their reason to take care of whatever business might need to be taken care of before they go on. Can they continue to converse with God within the sanctuary of their heart because they still have consciousness? So to intentionally put them over that threshold when they're not there, right? They haven't already become unconscious, I think is a disservice to them. So where that line is, medical professionals will know exactly how much morphine you can give, where a person can still be, somewhat in and out of consciousness and still be conversant with their loved ones. Maybe there's reconciliation that needs to take place, apologies, those are the moments when a lot of that healing happens. So to just put them out, that really deprives them of an opportunity they might need. So, yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Therrien. Very much. And we have one more Catholic Alive program this year, this RCIA year. It's March 11th, so it's a little over a month away. Our speaker will be Ann Rogers. She's now the Director of Communications for the Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh. Rather recently in that role, many of you will have read her. I did for years. She was the religion editor for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for many years, and has now become the Director of Communications for the Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh. She'll be speaking on how the church and religion are portrayed in the media. So please plan to join us on March 11th for that. And please plan to enjoy food, glorious food, after our closing song. So get out your song sheets and take her away. After, of course, a quick word from Father.
No, just need the mic over there.
Oh, you need the mic?
Yeah, that's all.
Sorry. I misinterpreted your hand.